Hey everyone, ready to fire up those dusty old memory banks?
This one is going to be fun.
Because today we're diving headfirst into the wonderful, wacky world of, you guessed it, Windows XP.
Oh, yeah, XP.
We're talking those colorful buttons, the iconic startup sound.
That startup sound.
And yeah, all right, maybe a few too many blue screens of death along the way.
Mm-hmm.
But hey, you wanted a deep dive, and when it comes to XP, get ready for a serious dose of nostalgia.
And maybe a little bit of therapy, too, right?
Who knows what we'll uncover?
Yeah.
But before we get into all that, we've got to set the stage. Think back, if you will, to the technological landscape of the early 2000s.
Pre-XP, things were different.
Different is one way to put it. I mean, Windows ME, anyone.
Let's just say stability wasn't its strong suit.
You're telling me?
Yeah.
Windows ME, the operating system that had you holding your breath every time you booted it up. No, seriously, you never knew if it was going to work or just crash and burn.
And that's why, my friends, Windows XP was such a big deal. Finally, some stability in our lives. Plus, they completely overhauled the user interface. Remember what it was like using a computer before XP?
Oh, I remember. It wasn't always pretty.
Exactly. So when those rounded buttons and that green start menu popped up, people were amazed.
It was like stepping into the future, right? The early 2000s version of the future, at least. But looking back now, was that bubbly, colorful design really good design? Or just, well, very of that moment?
You know, it's funny how design trends work. Like, XP's aesthetic, it just screams early 2000s, doesn't it? It was the era of skeuomorphism. Basically, designers tried to make digital elements look like their real-world counterparts. Think those 3D buttons that practically begged you to poke them?
Oh, I remember those. Pure skeuomorphism in action.
Yeah.
But speaking of things that tested our patience back then, how about the absolute joy of setting up a printer in XP?
Oh, don't get me started. Printer setups. More like printer expeditions into the Amazon. Seriously. 1 minute you're clicking through endless menus, and the next you're convinced your printer has developed sentience and decided to run away to join the circus. Well, the reality wasn't quite as exciting, I'm afraid.
More's the pity.
Most of the time it was just driver issues, you know? Or the nightmare of trying to figure out network settings.
And just when you thought you'd conquered the digital Mount Everest of printer configuration, bam! The blue screen of death. Talk about a mood killer.
I swear, those things always seem to happen at the worst possible moment, you know, like when you hadn't saved your work in, like, an hour.
Don't even remind me. It still haunts my dreams.
Right.
But on a serious note, what was the deal with those blue screens? Was it just Microsoft's idea of a cruel joke?
Not exactly. Think of it more like a distress signal. It was XP's way of saying, hey, something's not quite right here.
But in the most cryptic way possible.
It's true, those error messages weren't exactly user-friendly, but they were trying to tell you something. It usually meant a critical system error, something that, unfortunately, often required you to restart your entire computer. And those cryptic codes on the screen, those were actually clues to help diagnose the problem.
So basically, XP was speaking another language. And unless you were fluent in tech jargon, you were out of luck.
You'd practically need a tech dictionary just to decipher those messages, wouldn't you?
Talk about a steep learning curve. Speaking of learning curves, how about product activation in XP? I feel like that was the first time Microsoft really pushed that concept. And honestly, I remember a lot of people being less than thrilled about it.
It was a big change, that's for sure. Remember, before XT, you could pretty much install an operating system without jumping through all those digital hoops. But then software piracy started becoming a bigger and bigger problem, so Microsoft was like, all right, we got to do something about this.
Right. Because who could forget the days of digging through dusty drawers, desperately searching for that Windows CD? Though it's kind of funny when you think about it, because product activation, in a way, helped pave the way for this wave of personalization in XP.
It's true. All of a sudden, everyone wanted to make their digital space their own, so you had people switching out the default wallpaper, downloading custom themes, changing the color of their start button.
Everyone turned into a digital interior designer overnight.
Yeah.
And let's be real, anything to get rid of that default Bliss wallpaper.
Oh, the Bliss wallpaper. You know, it's actually iconic, though I have to confess, even I switched it out pretty quickly for something a bit more.
Yeah, I mean,
Don't me.
I think we've all been there.
Yeah.
But speaking of iconic XP visuals, how can we forget those classic screensavers? Those mesmerizing 3D pipes, the slightly creepy but totally captivating Mystify. They were practically works of art.
And they actually served a purpose beyond just looking cool, believe it or not. Especially back then when most people were still using CRT monitors. Leaving a static image on the screen for too long could actually damage those old monitors. So those constantly moving screensavers, they were actually preventing screen burn-in.
Who knew those trippy visuals were actually doing some good? It's amazing how technology evolves. These days, we don't even think twice about things like screen burn-in.
We're spoiled. But those limitations back then, as frustrating as they could be, they really made you appreciate how far we've come.
And how fast things have gotten. I mean, imagine trying to transfer like a music file to your MP3 player back in the XP days. It was an exercise in patience, to say the least.
Oh, tell me about it. With dial-up speeds and slower processors, it's like you practically had time to write a novel while you waited for a single file to copy.
It's true. These days, we can transfer gigabytes of data in the blink of an eye. But back then, you really had to be mindful of your digital actions.
You couldn't just download everything in sight, that's for sure.
And if you wanted to install a new program, forget about just clicking a button and watching it magically download. No, you had to embark on the grand adventure of installing from a CD-ROM.
Complete with the ever-present fear of scratching the disk. Or, even worse, getting halfway through the installation process only to realize you need Disk 2.
Oh, the dreaded Disk 2. A tale as old as time, but looking back, those experiences, as frustrating as they could be, they kind of taught you something about problem solving. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. You had to learn to troubleshoot, to adapt, to just kind of roll with the punches when it came to technology.
We were basically digital pioneers, forging our way through the wilds of the early internet. And speaking of venturing into the unknown, how could we forget about Internet Explorer 6? Or IE6, as it was not so affectionately known.
The good old days, right?
The browser that came pre-installed on every XP machine. And let's just say it was an experience.
It really was a different time. Slower internet speeds, simpler websites.
Websites with so many blinking GIFs, it was like staring into a digital disco ball.
And don't even get me started on the online security, or lack thereof.
Back then, it was Wild West of the internet. You never knew what you were going to get.
And you definitely didn't want to click on anything you weren't supposed to.
I swear, everybody back then knew that one person who was like the designated IE6 fixer in their family or friend group. You know, the one you'd call up in a panic because your homepage had been hijacked by some shady search engine.
Ah, yes, browser hijacking. A classic problem in the IE6 era.
Back then, security wasn't exactly top of mind for every web developer. So you had all sorts of, shall we say, interesting things happening.
It's amazing how much things have changed, right? Now we have entire teams dedicated to cybersecurity.
And we still have those uh-oh moments.
It's true.
But there's a part of me that misses those simpler times, you know? Maybe it's the nostalgia talking, but there was a certain charm to it all.
I get that. It's like looking at old photos. They might be a little blurry around the edges, but they capture a certain moment in time.
Yeah, and you know what else? It wasn't just the design. Back then, we had to be way more hands-on with our tech.
Oh, absolutely. You couldn't just sit back and expect things to work perfectly, you know? We had to tinker, we had to troubleshoot.
We had to become one with the machine.
And, I kind of miss that sometimes.
Me too.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, technology's amazing these days, but maybe we lost a bit of that connection, that sense of accomplishment when you finally got something to work.
Totally. Back then, we were more like digital explorers figuring things out as we went along.
Hacking our way through the digital jungle, one blue screen of death at a time.
And, that brings us back to our original question about Windows XP, right?
Was it really all that great, or were we just looking back with those rose-tinted nostalgia glasses?
It's a tough one, for sure. XP had its flaws, no doubt about it. But it also changed the game. I mean, for a lot of people, XP was their introduction to computers.
The first digital love.
Exactly. However glitchy or frustrating it might have been at times, those early experiences, they made an impact.
They shaped a generation of computer users, for better or worse.
Yeah.
It's like that old car you had back in the day, the one that was always breaking down. But it was yours, and it got you where you needed to go.
That's a great analogy. I think that's why people still talk about XP today. It wasn't just an operating system. It was part of our lives.
Part of the furniture.
Exactly. We have so many memories tied to it, both good and bad. And even though those blue screens were the absolute worst, I can't help but feel a little nostalgic for them now.
Me too. It's a shared experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, remember that time when our computers crashed constantly? Good times. But seriously, folks, it seems like XP's real legacy might not be about the tech specs or the design, but about the human connection it created.
It's true.
Even if it was just a shared groan over a frozen screen. And that's something pretty special, I think. But we want to hear from you. What piece of tech from your past takes you straight back? What brings on that wave of nostalgia? Hit us up on social media and share your memories. And until next time, happy computing, everyone.